Hi, and welcome to a review of the present system of all four conjugations, the indicative and the subjunctive. And remember, the present system is everything that's formed off the first and second principal parts of the verb. So to begin with, principal parts. Most verbs have four principal parts, and the verbs we're going to be working with today are porto, portare, portavi, portatus, doceo, docere, docui, doctus, traho, trahere, traxi, tractus, and audio, audire, audivi, auditus. First, the first principal part. The first principal part is the first person singular present indicative active of the verb, and it means I blank or I am blanking. So porto means I carry or I am carrying. The second principal part is the present active infinitive, so it means to blank or to be blanking. So portare means to carry or to be carrying. The second principal part gives you the stem for the present indicative and subjunctive, active and passive, the imperfect indicative and subjunctive, active and passive, and the future indicative active and passive. The second principal part is also super important because it shows you what conjugation a verb is. If it has a long A, it's first conjugation, a long E, second conjugation, a short E, third conjugation, a long I, fourth conjugation. And conjugation matters because conjugation determines what vowels come before the endings of the present, imperfect, and future indicative, and the present and imperfect subjunctive. Let's start with the present indicative, active, and passive. In the active, it means I blank or I am blanking. In the passive, I am blanked or I am being blanked. First conjugation. The present indicative is formed from the stem from the second principal part. Remember that the vowel of the first conjugation is long A. And then personal endings. Personal endings show you what person the verb is, what its subject is. So we take the stem and that vowel and the personal endings, O-S-T, mus, tis, nt for the active, or, ris, tor, more, mini, entor for the passive. Notice that before the O of the active, first person singular, and the or of the passive, first person singular, that A disappears. Notice too that that long A is shortened before final T, NT, and entor. All right, so porto, portas, portat, portamus, portatus, portant, portor, portaris, portator, portamor, portamini, portantor. Second conjugation, remember its vowel is long E. And so the present indicative is formed from that stem from the second principal part, an E, and then those same personal endings, OST, mustis, NT for the active, or ristor, more, minientor for the passive. Note that the E sticks around before the O of the first person singular active and passive in the second conjugation. Note too that it is shortened before the T, NT, and entor endings, and also before the vowel O, shortened before another vowel. Third conjugation, its vowel is short E, and that's the problem with the third conjugation, that short E is unstable. So it disappears before the O and or endings. It changes to a short I in many of the other forms, to a U before the final NT and entor of the third person plural. In fact, the only place where we actually have a short E is here in the second person singular of the passive, traheris, you are being dragged. Fourth conjugation is better. Its vowel is long I, so we have the stem and the I, which sticks around even before the O and or endings of the first person singular, just like the long E stuck around in dokeo and dokeor. Notice it gets shortened before that final T, out it, and notice we insert a U in the third person plural, active and passive. The long I is shortened before the following vowel. Now let's go on to the imperfect indicative, active and passive. In the active, I was blanking, I used to blank. In the passive, I was being blanked, I used to be blanked. The imperfect is actually much more regular. In the first conjugation, we take that stem from the second principal part, porta. We add the tense sign, ba, and personal endings. So porta throughout, ba, and then almost the same personal endings. It's mst, mustis, nt in the active, ristor, more, minientor in the passive. Notice the long A of the ba gets shortened before final M, T, NT in the active, before final R and entor in the passive. Imperfect indicative of the second conjugation. Again, the stem from the second principal part, doke, ba, and the personal endings, just like for the first conjugation, the long A of the ba gets shortened before final M, T, NT in the active, R, and entor in the passive. Third conjugation, it's the stem from the second principal part, and here we help that short E out by lengthening it throughout. Okay, it's a long E throughout, and then the same exact bombas bot, bombas batis bont, bar, baris, bator, bomor, bomini, bontor, endings that we saw before. Fourth conjugation. Now remember, the vowel of the fourth conjugation is long I. What happens in the imperfect is it turns to I long E. We add a long E, and then the I gets shortened. So audiebam, audiebas, audiebat. Okay, other than that, other than this vowel in here, it works exactly like the other conjugations. Now the future indicative, active, I will blank, passive, I will be blanked. The first conjugation uses that stem from the second principal part, bo or bit or boo, once it even uses be, plus personal endings. Okay, so bo, bis, bit, bimis, bitis, bunt in the active, bor, beris, bitor, bimor, bimini, buntor in the passive. Okay, that short vowel, that, usually it's an I, but it changes around quite a lot. It disappears before the O's, right? It changes to a U here, an E there. You can compare what happens to here to what happens in the present indicative of traho, if you like. All right, same is going on here in the second conjugation. It's the stem from the second principal part, plus bo, bis, bit, bimis, bitis, bunt in the active, bor, beris, bitor, bimor, bimini, buntor in the passive. Again, you can compare what happens to the vowel after the B here to the present of traho. The third and fourth conjugations are actually easier in the future indicative because they work differently. The tense sign here is a long E. And you can see the E throughout, except in the first person singular where it changes to a short A. So traham, trahes, trahet, trahemus, trahetus, trahent in the active, trahar, traheris, trahetor, trahemor, trahemini, trahentor in the passive. Notice that the long E gets shortened before final T, NT, and entor, just like you'd expect. Finally, the fourth conjugation, it's the stem plus that same A then E plus the personal endings you already know. Notice that the long I of the stem sticks around throughout, whereas the short E, that's typical of the third conjugation, disappears in the future of the third conjugation. Now, we're going to take a look at the present subjunctive. The present subjunctive of the first conjugation, we're going to take the stem, port, and we're going to add a long E and the personal endings. The personal endings here are MST, musticenti, and then R ristor, morminientor. So it's that same M that we saw in bomba spot of the imperfect. Notice that the long E, as you'd expect, gets shortened before M, T, and NT in the active, before R and NTOR in the passive. For the second conjugation, the sign of the present subjunctive is E long A, plus those same personal endings. Again, the long A gets shortened before M, T, and NT in the active, R, and NTOR in the passive. For the third conjugation, it's the stem plus long A plus the personal endings. Long A gets shortened, M, T, and NT in the active, R and NTOR in the passive. And finally, the fourth conjugation. It's the stem, aud, plus I long A, plus the same personal endings, and it gets shortened. The long A gets shortened exactly where you'd expect it to. And on to the imperfect subjunctive. The imperfect subjunctive is the easiest of all. Take the second principal part, lengthen the final E, and add those same MST, mustis, NT, R ristor, morminientor personal endings. So portarem, portares, portaret. I said we lengthen that final E, but then it gets shortened again before final M, T, and NT in the active, R and NTOR in the passive. Second conjugation, exactly the same. The second principal part, final E lengthened, and those same personal endings. Third conjugation, again, second principal part, lengthen that final E, add the personal endings. Fourth conjugation, second principal part, lengthen the final E, add the personal endings. The imperfect subjunctive is the easiest of any of them if you know the second principal part.